What it do, Dream Team? Here we are with another reaction video. So excited to jump back more into this topic. We've been reacting to, I feel like, the British Empire lately. Some evil things that it's done, some great things that it's done. So I'm intrigued to keep jumping into the topic and hearing from more and more people on it. So here we are with the title. We got Jordan Peterson. Do you really think the British were evil? Before we jump in, make sure you guys subscribe, ring notification bell, give the video a thumbs up. Let's find out.
Should we speak of colonialism and slavery in the same breath as if they were the same thing? Now, one of the weird tensions that emerges for me there, and I've tried to think this through clearly, I'm reading at the moment a multi-volume history of slavery put out, I think, by Cambridge University Press. And my sense historically, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, is that slavery is a ubiquitous feature of human societies. And the conscious realization that slavery itself is intrinsically wrong, even in the case, let's say, of prisoners of war or debt or debtors, that notion emerged with great difficulty, and it manifested itself most profoundly in the UK, probably in the person of Wilberforce, who and the Christian Protestant evangelists who made a very strong case that slavery itself was intrinsically immoral. And the consequence of that was eventually that the British Navy fought for about 175 years on the high seas to make slavery a counterproductive enterprise. And one of the things that sort of terrifies me about the radical leftist enterprise is that they really risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because whatever it was that impelled Wilberforce and then the entire UK to stand against slavery is the only thing we know of in the entire history of the world that actually did stand against slavery with any degree of success. So what other cases do you think can be made that colonialism and slavery were not the same thing? And why do you think there is this insistence on the radical left side to deny the very process that actually did free slaves insofar as they've become free in recent times?
So,
Huh. I feel like that's an interesting take on it. And thank God the British it consciously in Wilberforce he started to think and be like, this ain't right, this is immoral, this is wrong, this is evil. And they decided, know what I'm saying? And shout out to the British, and fought on the high seas for 175 years to help abolish the enterprise. And I guess, like Jordan Peterson said, that was really the only, or they were really the only ones, or that was the only thing that started this process of getting rid of slavery. So, I mean, the British were responsible for that. So, shout out to the UK. We appreciate that a lot, because slavery, 100%, very immoral, 100%, very wrong. So he says, he uses an analogy like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and you can't. It's saying slavery and colonialism are two different things. Where the bathwater is slavery, and I assume colonialism is the baby in this analogy. And so you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm intrigued to hear his take on colonialism. Before I say anything, I want to hear Jordan Peterson's take.
Insofar as they've become free in recent times.
so Jordan, I think the identification of colonialism with slavery is similar to the 1619 project in the United States, which identifies the foundations of the US with fundamentally racist and therefore fundamentally illegitimate. I think what's happened is that the probably through Black Lives Matter, the killing of George Floyd in 2020 in Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter movement came across the Atlantic with no change of clothes, landed in Britain, and our equivalent is to say contemporary Britain is systemically racist, and the reason we're systemically racist is that we continue to revere our colonial past, let's say, by having a statue to Cecil Rhodes. And as we all know, colonialism was essentially about slavery, which was based on a racist view of Africans as subhuman. So colonialism equals slavery equals racism, and that's the foundations of Britain. And that's why we have to repudiate our colonial past, pull down Cecil Rhodes, call down John A. Macdonald in Canada, and somehow, therefore, we liberate ourselves from systemic racism. And that's the logic behind the colonialism and slavery mantra. So in this country, those two things are commonly talked about as if they were the same thing. And my very simple point in that second chapter is to say, wait a moment, as you've just said, Jordan, yes, for 150 years, some British people, by no means all, were involved in slave trading and profiting from slavery in the West Indies. But from 1807 onwards, and then 1833, first the slave trade, then slavery itself were abolished by the British. And for the rest of the empire's existence, for another 150 years roughly, the British were involved in anti-slavery. So you cannot identify British colonialism with slavery because for the second half of its life it was anti-slavery.
So his take, if I'm getting the gist of it, and this is just my perspective of it and the gist that I'm getting from it, is America, I mean, it said, and I mean, I guess it's true, America was the foundation of America was built upon slavery. Facts. And it was built upon racism. Facts. And so now today, when you have like things like George Floyd, it's still saying because your foundation was built on racism, like systemic racism, of course, is still going to be there because that's how the foundation was built. And that kind of backlash is kind of trickling over to the UK, and they're saying because they're saying, well, the UK, like, y'all are no better because y'all still praise these people who, what's the word I'm looking for? Y'all still praise these people who are okay with colonialism. Y'all still praise these people who subjected colonialism. I don't even know if that's the word I'm looking for, but who allowed, that's what I'll go for, who allowed colonialism. Y'all still praise these people. And so by saying that, in that boat, you're throwing colonialism and slavery in the same boat. And what he and Jordan Peterson saying is that there are two different things. The British did have slaves for 150 years, which absolutely immoral, absolutely wrong. But the thing about the British is they realized that before anybody else did, and they not only made it illegal and abolished it in Britain, they decided to fight the slavery crusade worldwide and fight the slave trade worldwide and fight people from going to get these slaves, and so they're saying you cannot establish. British has been against anti-slavery for so long. You cannot throw the UK, the British, and slavery into the same sentence because it's like, no, the British were the ones who abolished the slave trade, who are anti-slavery, who were against it. And so this is just interesting to listen to. Keep it going.
Colonialism with slavery because for the second half of its life it was anti-slavery.
Okay.
And yes, slavery in one form or another, and some forms were more humane than others, has been around since virtually the dawn of time, practiced on every continent by black and brown and red-skinned and yellow-skinned people as well as white-skinned people. The Comanche nation in the southwest of the US ran what one historian has called a vast slave economy in the 1700s. The Arabs were involved in slavery. Africans were selling African slaves to the Romans and the Arabs before they ever sold them to Europeans.
And I would say I commented on that in another video, and I was saying, like, it's disgraceful, it's disgusting how the Africans were the ones who were selling their own people into slavery to these other nations. But somebody commented, and I understood that comment when they said, well, Africans were selling people from like rivaling tribes or like tribes who were against them. And so they didn't look at it as selling their own people. They looked at it as, right, selling a tribe, an enemy tribe, right? And I mean, in the history of the world, right, you don't really show mercy to your enemies. There have been instances where you show mercy to your enemies, 100%. But I'm saying more times than not, you're gonna be less likely to show mercy to your enemies. So Africans didn't look at it, this is my people, I'm doing this to my people, I'm hurting my people. No, they looked at this as, this is an enemy tribe. You know what I'm saying? We've been at war with each other. They tried to kill us, we tried to kill them. They are not our friends. They are absolute enemies. We have no regard for them. We have no mercy for them. We're at war with each other. So once we conquer them, we have no issue in selling them to other nations. And I understood that still hate that slavery was ever a thing. But like he said, it's not just a certain time period. Since the dawn of humanity in one form or another, slavery has been around. Whether it was more humane or inhumane, it's been around. So I'm just because I hated history in school. Did not like history in school. But the more that I've watched on YouTube about different countries and the slave trade and geopolitics and dude, I'm just starting to get very fascinated, very interested in history. Well, I'm gonna let them go. I'm sorry. I just get fascinated.
So we may be dismayed at the fact that so many Europeans and British people, up until the late 1700s, accepted this institution and the fact of slave trading. But we have to put it in context. Everyone did it, including slaves who escaped from the plantations in Jamaica into the forested interior. Some of them kept slaves of their own, so common was the practice. So
Wow.
yes, what happened in the late 1700s was that for the first time in history, some nations, not just Britain, also Denmark and France, came to the view that owning other people as your property without them having any rights was morally abhorrent. And for the first time in history, these nations, eventually led by Britain, abolished the slave trade and slavery. And then Britain used its imperial power, its power for humanitarian purposes, to abolish slavery from Brazil across the Atlantic, across Africa, India to Malaysia.
Yes.
So power can be a good thing, and in that case, it was used for humanitarian purposes. The irony here is, Jordan, as you suggested just before I started speaking, the irony here is, in that case, the empire and those humanitarians who were lobbying for the imperial power to be used to suppress slavery, they were the progressive people of their day.
I like knowing exactly where my meat comes from. And with
I'm gonna skip all the sponsors, so I'm gonna get back to this.
JBP, that's moist.
Well, it also seems to me, and you're in a great position to comment on this. So first of all, we have to accept to some degree that the willingness to use power and compulsion and to keep slaves is relatively ubiquitous across the entire human family, let's say, and that opposition to that emerges with difficulty and rarely. And then you have to ask yourself, what are the preconditions for that kind of opposition? And it was certainly the case with Wilberforce, as far as I can tell, that he was driven by the conviction that all men and women are made in the image of God, and that it was a violation of a transcendent ideal, that slavery in and of itself was the violation of a transcendent ideal. And that is something that's deeply rooted in the Christian tradition. And deeper than that, I mean, there's certainly the dawning of objection to the notion of slavery and tyranny in the book of Exodus. That's much older than Christianity. But it's still an idea that emerged with difficulty. And I have tried to think my way around this, right? Because I don't like to multiply unnecessary metaphysical presumptions. But I can't see at all that opposition to slavery would have emerged the way it did in Britain if it wouldn't have been able to draw on a well of metaphysical and religious presupposition that was predicated on the idea that each person has a soul, and that that soul in some manner has a divine value.
Yep.
Okay.
So
So he said Wilberforce was moved by this deep conviction, by this deep ideal, religious ideal that we all men and women were made in God's image, which I absolutely love that idea. So he saw that after seeing it through that perspective, or thinking of it through that perspective, it is then wrong for people to own other people. If we're all made in God's image, it is immoral, it is evil for people to own other people. So he fought with such conviction because he believed in this ideal so much. And it's like I guess Jordan Peter was saying, it'd be hard to find an opposition to slavery because it was happening everywhere. It was happening since the dawn of time. Why would you stop this when there's so many people benefiting from it? But because of this ideal, so many people were able to get behind it. The British Empire got behind this ideal and fought to end slavery. And so this ideal, everybody started believing into it, which I believe in that ideal too. Believe we're all made in God's image. We're all created equal. Yes, but and so it was so many people started believing in this, and so that led people to fight with such conviction against the horror of the slave trade. I like this.
You're quite right. The main impulse for the abolition movement was Christian, evangelical Christian.
Okay.
And so John Wesley in 1774 published a treatise called Upon Thoughts of Slavery, and on the front page of the treatise is a quotation from the book of Genesis, where is it Cain says something like, "Am I my brother's keeper?" God's answer being, "Yes, yes, you are," and the implication being that all human beings, regardless of race and cultural development, are equally children of the one God, and that was clearly the main conviction that drove evangelical Christians, nonconformist Christians initially to found.
And I didn't know about that comment by Wesley, so that ties the story of Cain and Abel in with the opening chapters of the earlier parts of Genesis, the opening verses of the earlier part of Genesis. Right, so you have the proposition that human beings are made in the image of God, and you have the later proposition in the Cain and Abel story that means that you have a divine obligation to act in relationship to others with that divine value in mind.
That's right. And so and now we're getting on to chapter 3 on race here, Jordan. So this Christian conviction of the fundamental basic equality of all human beings, regardless of race, that persists throughout the British Empire. There was in the second half of the 1800s the development of a contrary view, which you might call scientific or biological racism, which holds that you have a hierarchy of races, and the white races are naturally biologically superior to non-white races. So you have a kind of permanent fixed racial hierarchy. But this notion of some peoples being naturally inferior vied with the Christian notion, but never displaced it. So, for example, I was reading, and I quote this in my book, an account of debates in the Parliament of Canada in the 1880s. And it's reported by the historian that every time someone would stand up and say that the Native Americans are naturally inferior, others would stand up, and other MPs would stand up and say, "No, that's not British, that is not Christian." Yeah.
So they were kind of against racism too, in a sense of they didn't believe that any race, in believing in Christianity, they didn't believe that any race was superior or inferior than any other race. This stuff is just fascinating. So were slavery and colonialism different? I think I have a lot to learn about colonialism. I think I don't know, and I still have a lot to learn about slavery. I don't know enough to form an educated perspective. I guess I'll say that. But what I can say from my uneducated perspective at the moment, I don't think colonialism was a good thing. I think it had similar traits they might have been different, but it had similar traits to slavery. I think colonialism involved holding people down, not allowing people right. But then I just struggle with it because it's like whoever's in power wants to stay in power, right? And I guess the way you stay in power is by making sure that other nations aren't able to get into power. But I don't agree with colonialism, and I don't agree with holding anyone down. I guess I just I can understand it from a logic standpoint, and I hate that. And it's almost like, yeah, the British Empire did good things, they did evil things. It's like they were the top power, they were the top empire at the time. So of course, a lot of people, a lot of nations, a lot of countries are gonna hate them because they were the rulers. They were the end all be all at the time. They ruled over everyone, and they did invade, and they did have colonialism, and they did conquer, and they did do this. So of course the people that are conquered, the people that are invaded, the people that were held down are going to hate them and going to always hate them for everything that was done. But it's like, if other people were in that position, would they have not done the same? That's the thing that I struggle with. I'll always disagree with colonialism. I'll always disagree with thinking anyone's inferior. I'll always disagree with holding anyone down to make sure you stay in power. I'll always disagree with it all. But I guess logically I have an understanding of it. That's all we have. If you like that reaction, make sure you check out this one. It's your boy D Neal. Out.